Something is happening in California right now that even the people running one of the most prestigious tennis tournaments in the entire world were simply not prepared for. And I am not talking about a social media trend. I am not talking about a few hundred fans getting excited online. I am talking about a full-scale mobilization that has reportedly left tournament directors genuinely stunned. Ticket prices are climbing, sections are being booked in groups, and the desert city of Indian Wells is about to experience something that 30 years of tournament history simply has no blueprint for. Before I tell you exactly what is going on, I want you to hold one number in your head: 31. Alright, let us get into this properly. Eala is in the main draw of the BNP Paribas Open at Indian Wells. And I know that sounds like a simple sentence, like something you would read in a press release and scroll past. But I want you to actually sit with what that means for a second, because I think the significance of it gets lost when people treat it like routine news. She is in the main draw, not through qualifying, not through a wild card handed to her by the tournament, because they wanted her name on the poster, through her ranking, world number 31, a ranking she built from 137 in the span of roughly 12 months, through some of the most impressive results women's tennis has seen from a player of her age and background in a very long time. That is the number I asked you to remember: 31, from 137 to 31 in 1 year. And here is the thing about that climb that I think deserves more attention than it gets. Rankings in professional tennis are not a gift, they are an accumulation of results. Week after week, tournament after tournament, against players who are all also trying to protect their own numbers and improve their own positions on the same ladder. When you see a player jump from outside the top 100 to inside the top 35 in a single season, the natural reaction is to wonder if something lucky happened. A weak draw somewhere, a few injured opponents, some fortunate scheduling. With Eala, you go back and look at the actual results, and there is none of that. The Dubai quarterfinals where she beat Jasmine Palilini, who was ranked world number 8 at the time, a former Roland Garros finalist, a player who had been one of the best on tour for the better part of 2 years. Eala beat her 6-1, 7-6. That is not a lucky scoreline, that is a statement. The Miami Open semifinals came through qualifying, which means she played extra rounds in the Florida heat and humidity before any of the seeded players had even arrived at the facility, and she still reached the Final Four: Auckland semifinals, Abu Dhabi quarterfinals, a gold medal at the Southeast Asian Games, the Australian Open main draw debut. You add all of that up across 12 months, and what you get is not luck. What you get is a player who has figured something out and is now consistently doing it against the best competition in the world. So when Indian Wells confirmed she was in the main draw at number 31, the tennis community noticed. But it was a different community that really exploded. California is home to the largest Filipino diaspora in the United States. That is not an opinion or an estimate I pulled out of the air. That is demographic reality. The Filipino-American community in this state is enormous, it is organized, it is passionate about sports, and specifically passionate about athletes who represent the Philippines on the international stage. And it has been building toward a moment exactly like this one since Eala's Miami run last year made it undeniable that she was capable of competing at the very top of the sport. They have been watching, they have been waiting, and the moment her name appeared in the Indian Wells main draw as a direct entry, not a qualifier, not a wild card, but a legitimate ranked player entering the 5th Grand Slam through her own merit, the response was immediate, and it was enormous. Fan clubs from Los Angeles to San Diego to Daly City started organizing group bookings almost immediately. When I say sections of the stadium are being reserved by community groups, I am not exaggerating for effect. Entire blocks of seats are being coordinated through community networks because these fans want to create something intentional. They watched what happened in Dubai, where the Filipino support in the stands was so overwhelming and so loud that after Eala's quarterfinal victory over Paolini, Coco Gauff walked over to the stands and addressed the crowd directly, acknowledging what they had brought to the atmosphere of that tournament. They saw that and they are determined to replicate it, and then multiply it. Because in California, they are not a small group of dedicated travelers who flew in from Manila or made a special trip from the East Coast. They are already there, they live there, this is their backyard, and Eala is coming to them. The secondary ticket market has already reflected this. Reports of seats going for double their face value during sessions when Eala is expected to play are circulating, and that is not unusual when you consider what has happened to ticket markets at every tournament she has entered this season. The economic reality of what people in tennis circles have started calling the Eala effect arriving on American soil has caught the tournament's commercial operation genuinely off guard because their historical data simply has no reference point for this. A player ranked 31st in the world, generating this level of ticket demand from a single demographic, not from the general tennis audience, from one community, that is extraordinary. I want to give you some context for what Indian Wells actually is because I think it matters here. The 5th Grand Slam is not a nickname people invented to flatter the tournament, it is earned. The prize pool for 2026 exceeds $9 million. The women's draw includes every major name in the sport right now. Aryna Sabalenka, the world number 1 and multiple Grand Slam champion, who has been arguably the most dominant player in women's tennis for the past several years. Iga Swiatek, who has been world number 1 for extended stretches and remains one of the most complete baseline players the sport has ever produced. Mira Andreeva, who is the defending champion at this specific event, and who at her age is already doing things that are genuinely remarkable. Jessica Pegula, Coco Gauff. The entry list reads like a complete collection of every player who matters in women's tennis right now. These are players who have spent years building the reputations and delivering the results that generate premium ticket demand and command the prime court assignments at a tournament of this stature. And sitting at number 31 in that draw is Alex Eala, who is generating more ticket market movement from one specific demographic than the established stars on paper are generating from the broader tennis audience. I have been thinking about that a lot since the ticket report started coming out, because what it actually represents, if you really think about it, is a complete inversion of the normal commercial logic of professional tennis. Normally, the tournament's economic engine runs on the established names at the top of the rankings, the guaranteed attractions that every sponsor, every broadcaster, and every hospitality suite purchaser can plan around. What Alex Eala is doing to Indian Wells is disrupting that model, not through marketing or corporate strategy, but purely through the organic force of what she has achieved on the court and what that achievement means to a community that has been underrepresented in professional tennis for the entire history of the sport. Now, before all of this happened in California, there was a stop in Oregon. And I think the Oregon chapter of this story is actually one of the most important things to understand if you want to grasp the full picture of where Eala's head is at going into this tournament. She arrived in the United States early, deliberately early, before most of the European players were even thinking about their travel arrangements. She was already on American soil, getting acclimatized, and she went to Beaverton first, Nike World Headquarters, the most famous athletic brand campus on the planet. And what she found when she got there was a portrait of herself displayed in the Nike tunnel, alongside athletes whose names define what greatness means in sports. 2 portraits actually, one showing her iconic reaction after reaching the Miami semi-finals. If you have not seen that image, you need to find it. It is both hands on her face, tears, the completely unguarded emotional response of someone who has just done something that exceeded their own expectations. The caption on that portrait reads, "History in full bloom." Nike does not caption things carelessly. They chose those words with intention. They are one of the most culturally sophisticated marketing organizations in the history of global commerce, and they decided that 4 words was the right way to describe what Alex Eala is in the middle of doing right now. The second photograph displayed in that tunnel showed Eala taking a selfie with Filipino fans. Think about what that means. At the global headquarters of a company that represents Michael Jordan, Serena Williams, Cristiano Ronaldo, and LeBron James, they hung a photo of a tennis player taking a picture with her supporters. Because Nike understands something that some people in the tennis media are still trying to process. The Alex Eala story is not just an individual athletic achievement story. It is a community story. It is a cultural movement story. And the fan base that shows up for her everywhere she goes is not a secondary element of her brand. It is a central part of it. Putting that fan photo on the wall at headquarters is Nike telling the world exactly what they are investing in and why. I also think about what it must feel like to be Eala standing in that tunnel and seeing her own portrait on a wall next to athletes who have defined greatness across multiple generations of sport. There is no practice session in the world that tells you what you need to know about yourself the way that moment does. She has talked about her journey and the grind of it, the Rafa Nadal Academy years where the training environment was built on meticulous preparation, attention to every margin, and a work ethic that has no off switch. 7 years in that system shapes how you approach everything. It shows in the early arrival in the United States. It shows in the deliberate acclimatization plan for Indian Wells. The California desert is a specific playing environment, and players who underestimate it pay the price. The air is dry. The altitude affects ball flight in ways that players who have spent the first months of the year in sea-level conditions have to consciously adjust to. The courts play differently than what she faced in Dubai or in Melbourne. She is there early because she knows this, because the preparation is a non-negotiable part of how she operates. The combination of the Nike visit and the early arrival tells you the psychology going into this tournament is right. You cannot manufacture that kind of confidence, and you cannot fake that kind of readiness. She has seen her own face on the wall at global headquarters. She has given herself extra time to prepare for conditions that trip up players who do not respect them. She is healthy. She is ranked higher than she has ever been in her career, and she is walking into a tournament where an entire community is going to make it feel like home. Let us talk about what happens on the court though. Because I know the question that is already forming in the comments, can she make a deep run at Indian Wells? And honestly, I want to give you a real answer rather than a hype answer, because I think Eala actually deserves that more than she deserves inflated expectations. The draw at a Masters 1000 event is difficult, full stop. There are no free rounds. There are no matches where you can afford to have an off day and coast through on reputation, because the player on the other side of the net is going to be fully prepared and fully motivated, regardless of whether you showed up to play or not. Sabalenka on her best day is arguably the most powerful baseline player in the women's game. Swiatek at full intensity is a tactical and physical puzzle that very few players have solved in the past 3 years. And Riva is defending her title at this specific venue, and defending champions carry something psychological into a tournament that adds weight to every match they play. Gauff, whom Eala has already beaten this season, will be motivated for a rematch. The entire field is formidable. But here is what I actually think is going to happen. Eala is going to win matches. I believe that with some confidence based on what I have watched her do this season. She is not a player who is at Indian Wells to participate. She is there to compete, and compete with the full intention of going as far as her tennis can take her. The Miami semi-final last year came out of qualifying with all the extra physical cost that entails. This year she enters fresh, no qualifying matches eaten into her physical reserves. No extra rounds under Florida humidity burning through her energy before the real competition begins. She gets to arrive at the first round with the same amount of rest and preparation as the seeded players. That is a genuinely different situation than anything she has experienced at a tournament of this size before. And the crowd. Let us not pretend the crowd does not matter, because it absolutely does. Sam Querrey and Steve Johnson were talking about Eala's drawing power earlier this year and made the comparison that it was bigger than anything the men's side had seen from comparable ranked players, and they were right when they said it. The crowds in Auckland were remarkable for what they brought to the atmosphere. Melbourne set records. Dubai was a transformation of the tournament's energy entirely. California is not a smaller version of any of those. California is a multiplication. The Filipino-American community here is not making a special trip. They are going to their local tournament, and they are going en masse in organized groups, with the full intention of creating the same wall of sound that turned Dubai into something Coco Gauff felt she needed to directly acknowledge from the court after her match. Kim Clijsters once said that Alex Eala has to deal with the life of being like Michael Jordan in the Philippines. I want you to think about that comparison for a second, because Clijsters is not someone who throws hyperbole around. She is a 4-time Grand Slam champion who has seen and experienced everything in women's tennis. She observed Eala navigating the expectations, the attention, the emotional weight of being the symbol of an entire nation's tennis aspirations, and she reached for that specific comparison. The Michael Jordan reference. In California, what is about to happen is that same energy getting transferred to American soil, with even greater numbers behind it. Every player who has to face Eala in front of that crowd during this tournament is going to experience something that nothing in their previous Indian Wells campaigns prepared them for. The round of 64 is normally not particularly atmospheric. It is a professional match played in front of a decent-sized audience that is spread across multiple courts and has plenty of other options for where to point their attention. When Eala plays her first match, every Filipino fan who booked tickets for that session is going to be in that specific court. The noise when she wins a big point is going to be unlike anything that court has heard in a first-round match. And for the opponent, that changes the psychological landscape of the match in ways that are genuinely difficult to compensate for. Gauff understood this in Dubai, which is partly why she handled it the way she did, walking over and acknowledging the crowd rather than ignoring them. That was a smart and gracious move by a smart and gracious player. But it was also a recognition that you cannot fight that energy. The best you can do is acknowledge it and try to focus on your own game. Not every player has that level of emotional intelligence and composure. Some players respond to that kind of crowd pressure by tightening up, by making errors they would not normally make, by losing the mental connection to their game plan because the atmosphere feels hostile in a way their routine pre-match preparation did not account for. The commercial implications of what is happening at Indian Wells are also worth understanding, because they matter for Eala's career trajectory and for the broader story of tennis in communities that have historically been underserved by the sport's marketing and outreach efforts. Tournament organizers, sponsors and broadcast partners are watching ticket sales. They are watching hospitality demand. They are tracking the economic activity that follows a player through the draw. When they see a player ranked 31st generating revenue patterns that exceed what top 10 seeds are generating from the general audience, they make note of it. That note becomes a conversation. That conversation becomes scheduling priority and court assignment and broadcast time, all of which feeds back into visibility, which feeds back into sponsorship, which feeds back into the resources available for Eala's continued development. The Indian Wells tournament is already experiencing something that its commercial history does not have a reference point for. A mid-ranked player driving a demographic surge that is changing the secondary ticket market before the draw has even been released. When the actual draw comes out and fans know exactly which sessions to book, that energy is going to intensify further. The tournament directors who are reportedly shocked right now are going to be progressively more surprised as the week unfolds and they see what actually happens when those Filipino fans arrive in the desert. There is a larger story here too, and I want to name it directly because I think it matters for how we understand what Alex Eala's career represents beyond the wins and the rankings and the moments of individual brilliance on the court. Professional tennis, despite its truly global reach and its prize pool scale, has historically had a very narrow demographic center of gravity when it comes to players who reach the top levels and communities who feel represented in the sport. The top of the women's game has been dominated by players from Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and North America for as long as most fans can remember. That is not a criticism of those players or those regions. It is simply a reflection of where the developmental infrastructure has historically been concentrated. Academies, coaching networks, funding pipelines, the whole ecosystem that produces top professionals has been built around specific geographic and economic centers.